My name is Olivia Mitchell, and last Christmas Eve, as my family gathered around the dining table for our traditional holiday dinner, my father's words cut through the festive atmosphere like ice. "You'll die in debt like your uncle," he announced loudly, ensuring everyone heard his verdict on my 5-year tech startup journey. What he didn't know was that exactly 14 seconds after his proclamation, my phone would ring with the call that would change everything. The $200 million acquisition of my company had just been finalized. If you've ever been underestimated by those who should believe in you the most, drop a comment below letting me know where you're watching from, and hit that subscribe button to join me on this journey of vindication and rediscovery. The Mitchell family dining room had always been a battlefield disguised as a gathering place. The crystal chandelier my mother had insisted on buying for appearances cast unforgiving light on every interaction, highlighting the stark favoritism that defined our family dynamic. My older brother James, with his prestigious medical career and perfect family, occupied the throne of golden child since childhood. My younger sister Eliza, with her charming smile and law degree, wasn't far behind in the hierarchy of parental approval. And then there was me, the middle child who dared to dream differently, perpetually relegated to the shadows of their accomplishments. Our family operated on a simple currency: traditional success. Degrees from prestigious universities, careers with established titles, marriages to suitable partners. These were the benchmarks of value in Richard and Margaret Mitchell's household. My parents had built a respectable upper-middle-class life through my father's accounting firm, where predictability and caution were not just professional values, but a life philosophy. Risk was something to be avoided at all costs, a lesson they had tried to instill in all their children. James and Eliza had absorbed this teaching perfectly. I, however, had always seen things differently. This fundamental difference in worldview had created a chasm between us long before I ever launched my startup. I still remember the dinner celebrating my college graduation, a memory that perfectly encapsulated my position in our family constellation. "James finished medical school with honors," my father had announced, raising his glass in a toast. "Eliza has been accepted to Harvard Law," my mother had added proudly, despite the fact that the dinner was supposedly in my honor. When it finally came time to acknowledge my computer science degree, my father's words were tellingly brief. "And Olivia has finished her studies as well." The unspoken "finally" hung in the air, a reference to my decision to take a gap year to work on my first failed tech project before completing my degree. That night, as we ate the expensive cake with my name misspelled in frosting, I made a silent promise to myself. One day, they would have to acknowledge my success in terms they couldn't dismiss. I just never imagined how dramatically that moment would arrive, or how hollow their eventual recognition would feel. The path that led to that fateful Christmas Eve began 5 years earlier, when I left a promising position at a major tech company to pursue my own vision. I had been working on an algorithm that could revolutionize how small businesses optimize their supply chains and inventory management. The technology wasn't flashy. It wouldn't make headlines like social media platforms or cryptocurrency, but I recognized its potential to transform millions of struggling businesses. "You're throwing away a perfectly good career," my father had said when I told them about my decision over Sunday dinner. "For what? Some pipe dream that will probably fail within a year?" My mother had nodded in agreement, her lips pressed into that familiar thin line of disappointment. "Dad, I've done the research. There's a huge market need." "Research doesn't pay bills, Olivia," he interrupted. "Your uncle had research too, and look what happened to him." Uncle Charlie, my father's younger brother, had been an inventor, always working on gadgets and innovations that never quite made it to market. He died relatively young, leaving behind substantial debt and a garage full of prototypes that my father had dismissively cleared out. In our family mythology, Uncle Charlie had become the cautionary tale, the bogeyman of financial irresponsibility. What my father never mentioned was that Uncle Charlie had also been the only one who'd encouraged my interests in technology, who'd seen my potential when everyone else was focused on my siblings. Before he passed away, he'd given me a notebook filled with his ideas and one piece of advice I'd never forgotten: the people who love you the most can sometimes see you the least clearly. Despite my parents' dire predictions, I secured modest seed funding and launched Inventec. The early years were exactly as difficult as everyone expected. I worked 18-hour days, lived in a tiny studio apartment that doubled as my office, and poured every dollar back into development. Each family gathering became an exercise in deflection, as I tried to minimize my struggles, while my siblings' accomplishments were celebrated in exquisite detail. "Any sales yet?" my father would ask, not bothering to remember the name of my company. "We're still in development," I'd answer, the words feeling more hollow each time. He'd respond, before turning to James to discuss his recent promotion or Eliza's latest high-profile case. The lowest point came 3 years into my venture. An important investment round had fallen through. My main developer had quit for a more stable position, and I was facing the very real possibility of shutting down. That night, I sat alone in my apartment, surrounded by whiteboards covered in code and business projections, seriously considering giving up. I pulled out Uncle Charlie's notebook, now worn from frequent handling. Flipping through his sketches and notes, I found myself lingering on an idea he'd never pursued, a different approach to the same inventory problem I was trying to solve. Something clicked. By morning, I had restructured my entire algorithm, incorporating elements of Uncle Charlie's concept with my own technology. That pivot became the turning point. 6 months later, we secured a significant investment from Sarah Ventures, a respected venture capital firm that actually understood what we were building. With proper funding, we expanded our team, refined our product, and began acquiring our first major clients. The technology worked even better than I'd anticipated, helping small and medium businesses reduce inventory costs by an average of 32%. Success came gradually, then suddenly. Inventec's client base grew exponentially as word spread. Larger companies began approaching us. Industry publications started writing about our revolutionary approach to inventory optimization. But with each milestone, I found myself keeping the news from my family, nursing a growing determination to reveal my success only when it was too monumental to diminish. When the first acquisition talks began, I told no one. Through months of due diligence, valuation discussions, and negotiation, I maintained absolute secrecy. The timing of the final agreement, set to close on Christmas Eve, seemed almost poetic. For once, I looked forward to the annual Mitchell family holiday dinner. The night of the dinner, I arrived at my parents' colonial-style home carrying perfectly wrapped gifts and a secret that made me both nervous and exhilarated. James was already there with his wife and their 2 children. Eliza arrived shortly after me, accompanied by her fiancé, a surgeon she'd met through James. "Olivia, you're looking tired," my mother observed as she took my coat. "Are you sleeping enough? Is that little business of yours still keeping you up at nights?" I forced a smile. "Something like that." Dinner proceeded with familiar dynamics. James discussed his department's new research grant. Eliza shared news of her upcoming partnership at her law firm. My father beamed with pride, occasionally glancing at me as if to say, "See what real success looks like?" When it was inevitably my turn to share updates, I kept it vague. "Things are going well. We've expanded our client base significantly this year." "That's nice, dear," my mother said absently, already turning her attention back to Eliza. "Still just getting by?" my father asked, fork poised halfway to his mouth. "We're doing better than that, actually," I replied. "Well, don't expect this startup phase to last forever," he warned. "These tech bubbles always burst. Look at your uncle." "Dad, Uncle Charlie was an inventor in a completely different era," I interjected. His face hardened. "The principles are the same. He refused to pursue a stable career, chased fantasies instead of security. And what happened? You'll die in debt like your uncle if you keep this up." The table fell silent. Even James looked uncomfortable. And then, precisely 14 seconds later, my phone rang. I had programmed this specific ringtone for my lawyer. I answered it, aware of my family's annoyed glances at the interruption. "Yes, they did? It's confirmed? Thank you. Yes, Merry Christmas to you, too." I hung up and took a deep breath, looking around at my family's expectant faces. "That was my lawyer," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. "The acquisition of Inventec was just finalized. Tech Global has purchased my company for $200 million. The silence that followed was absolute. My father's fork clattered against his plate. My mother's hand froze in midair, wine glass tilted at a dangerous angle. That's not possible," my father finally stammered. "It is," I replied, pulling up the confirmation email on my phone and sliding it across the table to him. The papers were signed this afternoon. The initial payment hits my account at midnight. My mother found her voice next. $200 million? Our Olivia? The possessive "our" struck me as odd, as if my success had suddenly made me theirs again. James cleared his throat. "That's incredible, Liv. Why didn't you tell us the company was doing so well?" I looked directly at my father. Would it have mattered? Would anyone have believed me? No one answered, but their expressions said everything. The rest of dinner passed in a surreal haze. Suddenly, everyone wanted details about my company, My technology, my plans for the money. The siblings who had barely asked about my work for 5 years now hung on every word. My parents, who had dismissed my venture as a hopeless endeavor, now spoke of it with proprietary pride. "I always knew you had potential," my father declared, as if he hadn't spent years comparing me unfavorably to my siblings. "You get that entrepreneurial spirit from my side of the family." "From Uncle Charlie's side, you mean?" I corrected gently. His smile faltered. "Well, yes, I suppose in some ways." After dinner, as everyone moved to the living room for dessert, my mother pulled me aside. "Darling, this is wonderful news," she whispered, squeezing my arm. "You must let your father help you manage this money. He has excellent investment contacts." I extricated myself from her grip. "I've already assembled a financial team, Mom. Everything's handled." Her expression flickered between disappointment and disbelief. The idea that I could manage my own success seemed as foreign to her as the success itself. Later, as gifts were exchanged, I noticed a subtle shift in the family dynamic. James and Eliza, so long accustomed to occupying the spotlight, seemed slightly disoriented by the attention now focused on me. My father, who had always led these gatherings with patriarchal confidence, appeared diminished somehow, as if the foundations of his authority had been shaken. When I finally left that night, my father walked me to my car. A modest sedan I'd continued driving despite having the means to upgrade. "Olivia," he began, his breath forming clouds in the cold December air. "I may have been too harsh in my assessment of your business ventures." I waited, wondering if an actual apology would follow. It didn't. "Now that you've had this windfall," he continued, "you'll need to be careful. Money like this attracts all sorts of problems. Perhaps we should sit down after the holidays and discuss how to protect your interests." I studied him for a moment, this man whose approval I had sought for so long. "Dad, I've been running a successful company for years. I've negotiated a 9-figure acquisition. I think I can handle my own finances." His expression hardened slightly. "There's no need for that tone. I'm only trying to help." "Were you trying to help when you told me I'd die in debt like Uncle Charlie? Or when you dismissed my company as a little business for 5 years straight? That was different. I was concerned about your future." "No," I said quietly. "You were concerned about my conformity. There's a difference." The months following that Christmas Eve transformed my life in ways both expected and surprising. The financial implications were the most straightforward. I was suddenly wealthy beyond anything I had imagined growing up. But the personal repercussions proved far more complex. My family's attitude toward me underwent a dramatic shift. Suddenly, I was consulted on important decisions, invited to exclusive family events, introduced proudly to friends and colleagues. My parents began mentioning my remarkable business success to anyone who would listen, as if they had been my biggest supporters all along. What they didn't mention was how this success had disrupted the carefully maintained hierarchy of the Mitchell family. James, accustomed to being the golden child, now found himself in unfamiliar territory. His prestigious medical career, once the family's crowning achievement, seemed almost modest compared to my windfall. Eliza, always competitive, began sending me investment opportunities and business ideas, eager to associate herself with my new status. My father's behavior was perhaps the most telling. He oscillated between proud declarations about my achievement and awkward attempts to reassert his paternal authority. "You should consider investing in property," he would advise unsolicited. "The stock market is too volatile for someone inexperienced." I found these interactions increasingly exhausting. The validation I had once craved now felt hollow, tainted by the knowledge that it was my bank account, not my abilities, that had finally earned their respect. 3 months after the acquisition, I made a decision that shocked my family even more than my sudden wealth. I purchased Uncle Charlie's old house, a rambling Victorian that had been sold to cover his debts after his death. The property had changed hands several times since then, but when it came on the market, I knew immediately that I wanted it. "But why that old place?" my mother asked when I told them. "You could afford any house in the country now." "Because it matters to me," I replied simply. I spent 6 months renovating the house, modernizing its infrastructure while preserving its character. In the garage where Uncle Charlie had once tinkered with his inventions, I created a state-of-the-art innovation lab. And in the attic, I discovered something that brought me to tears, a forgotten box of Uncle Charlie's notebooks and prototypes that had somehow been overlooked when my father cleared out the house. These discoveries felt like messages from the past, validations that transcended my financial success. Uncle Charlie had seen something in me that my parents couldn't. Not just potential for conventional achievement, but a kindred creative spirit that approached problems differently. Meanwhile, I began putting my newfound resources to use in ways that reflected my values. I established a foundation to support young entrepreneurs from disadvantaged backgrounds. I funded computer science programs in underserved schools. And perhaps most meaningfully, I created the Charles Mitchell Innovation Grant for inventors pursuing unconventional solutions to practical problems. The inaugural grant ceremony was held exactly 1 year after the acquisition. I invited my entire family, including my parents. As we gathered in the community center where the grants would be presented, I could sense my father's discomfort. This event, celebrating the very qualities he had dismissed in both his brother and his daughter, challenged his worldview in ways he couldn't easily reconcile. When it came time for me to speak, I found myself addressing not just the grant recipients and attendees, but the ghosts of my past as well. Innovation isn't about conforming to expectations, I said. It's about seeing possibilities where others see problems. My uncle understood this. He may not have achieved commercial success in his lifetime, but his ideas, his approach to problem solving, inspired the work that led to mine. I paused, making brief eye contact with my father. Some might measure a life's worth by its financial outcome, but I believe true value lies in the courage to pursue your vision, even when those closest to you don't understand it. After the ceremony, as we gathered for refreshments, my father approached me, his expression unreadable. "Your uncle would have been proud," he said finally, his voice gruff. "I think so," I agreed. "I didn't understand him," my father admitted, "and I didn't understand you either." It wasn't quite an apology, but it was perhaps the most honest thing he had ever said to me. "I know, Dad. For what it's worth, I was wrong, about both of you." I nodded, accepting this acknowledgement for what it was, not the validation I had once desperately sought, but something more genuine, recognition of the truth. As my family prepared to leave, James lingered behind. "You know, Liv," he said, "I've been thinking about what you said in your speech, about seeing possibilities others miss." "What about it?" "I've been developing a medical device in my spare time. Nothing revolutionary, just a better way to administer certain treatments. The hospital isn't interested in developing it, but I believe it could help patients." I smiled, recognizing something in his expression that reminded me of myself 5 years earlier, and of Uncle Charlie before that. "Tell me about it," I said. "Maybe we could work on it together." 2 years have passed since that Christmas Eve dinner, when my father's prediction and my announcement collided so dramatically. My life has settled into a new normal that would have been unimaginable before. I divide my time between mentoring startups, overseeing my foundation, and working on new technologies that interest me. Not for financial gain, but for the pure joy of creation. My family relationships have evolved in complex ways. My parents' pride in me now seems tempered with a certain bewilderment, as if they're still trying to reconcile the daughter they thought they knew with the woman I've become. James and I have grown closer through our collaboration on his medical device, which is now in clinical trials. Eliza remains more distant, our shared history too laden with competition to easily transform into adult friendship. Last Christmas, I hosted the family gathering at Uncle Charlie's, now my home. As we sat in the dining room I had renovated, surrounded by subtle nods to my uncle's inventive spirit, I couldn't help reflecting on how dramatically circumstances had changed in just 2 years. "A toast," my father said, raising his glass, "to family, to success, and to seeing clearly what matters most." Our glasses clinked together, the sound ringing with both harmony and lingering dissonance. I caught his eye across the table, and in that moment, we both acknowledged a truth that had taken decades to surface. Validation from others, even those we love most, can never replace the knowing of one's own worth. Sometimes the greatest vindication isn't proving others wrong. It's discovering you never needed their approval in the first place. The journey from seeking external validation to finding internal confidence marks the true passage into ownership of one's life. That's a kind of wealth no acquisition can provide, and no family dynamic can diminish. Have you ever been underestimated by those who should have believed in you the most? How did you respond? Did you fight to prove them wrong, or find strength in charting your own path regardless of their approval? Share your experience in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories about finding your own value in a world that may not always see it clearly.